start my presentation, I sometimes like to know the background of people. Where did they come from? How did they get to Dorado Hills? Is it turned on?
Just keep talking.
I was born on a little place on a farm, sharecropper farm in Oklahoma, near Chandler, Oklahoma. Then in 1933, there were 3 of us kids. My brother and my sister was only 2 months old. With Grandpa and Grandma and my aunt and uncle, we started for California. My father had a Model A sedan. My grandpa had a Chevrolet truck with a big canvas on the back and what few possessions they had. And there were also a couple of teenage ants that were along, and they stayed all in the back. We came down Highway 66 all the way across and came up to Sacramento because my grandmother had a sister who lived here, and they all worked in the canneries in Sacramento, like Burkhart Richards, which was big at that time. We were Okies, but my mother never let us talk that way. She was from Arkansas and had a very meager education, but she had 3 more children in California, 6 altogether. My father was born in Missouri, and he had a bad back, even from a young age. So I think I inherited his bad back, and he died at 76. My mother died at 92 with good health, so I think I have her longevity and my father's bad back, so I'm going to suffer a long time. When I was out on a walk the other day with a dog, I saw a man, and we'd talk every once in a while, and I was telling him about my arthritis in my back and how painful it is. It doesn't stop, it's 24 hours a day. And he says, arthritis is temporary. And I didn't understand what he meant by that, and I thought, he doesn't have it, or he wouldn't say that. So I was walking along with the dog, and all of a sudden I started to laugh. And I thought, at 85, it is temporary. At 85, everything's temporary. So anyway, we came to California. We grew up in Carmichael. My dad bought some land there, $50 an acre, but $50 was a lot of money in 1933, 34. We went to Carmichael Grammar School. Some of the things I remember was Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. On Monday, I led the pledge of allegiance to the whole school, and I remember that very well. That was really important to me. World War II was devastating. Many of our teachers left to go into the services. 7th grade, I had 6 different teachers. So World War II was a big thing in our lives. I went to Salmon High School, graduated there in 1948. There was a fellow who was in a class behind me, and his name was Lefty James, and he had a cute little sister that was a freshman. And she was a good friend of my sister Faye, but she was much too young for me. So then, when I went away, I went to Valparaiso University, a Lutheran university in Indiana. I wanted to become a veterinarian, and I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biology and a minor in economics. And I'll tell you about why I didn't become a veterinarian later. But anyway, I would come home in the summer. I couldn't afford to come home during the year. So I'd come home for the summer, and Lynn was always at our house because we ate very well, even though we raised all everything. And she was always there, and I noticed that she was there. Finally, when I came home after I graduated, wow, she's really developed. And so I asked her out for a date, and we went, and then I got drafted shortly after that because I had to print it all the time. I was in the university. And so I was coming home on weekends. I was in the military police school down in the Bay Area. And so then we got married in September 1953, and we moved to San Pedro, where I was stationed. And then I got called to go to Korea. The war was over, but I was gone 9 months and came back. And then we kind of moved forward, and then in 1956 we bought a new Volkswagen, and that was a new thing because you had to raise the hood up in the front and put the gas in, and everybody thought you were crazy when you pulled into the station. I went to work after a while at Union Oil Company, a management program, and I had 35 stations that I supervised. And one day they called me and they said, we're going to build a station in Dorado Hills. I had never heard of Dorado Hills. And we want you to take a pail of grease up there to one of the contractors. We don't want to send a truck along. Well, I lived in Carmichael, and I guess they thought that was close, but I got the pail of grease and started up Highway 50, and it seemed like I drove for miles and miles and miles, and I finally came to this area. And you could see the roads they were putting in Dorado Hills Boulevard at that time. And Arrowhead Drive, you could see where that was. And then the fellow told me this is where they're going to build the service station on the corner. It was right off of what was going to be Dorado Hills Boulevard at that time. And there's this picture of it shows what it looked like after they got the station finished. Over here you can see Park Village in the background, and then this is where all of the commercial areas right now, this whole field, that went for acres back in through there. And I found that picture, that painting down in Folsom, and they wanted $100 for it. Well, $100 at that time was a lot of money, so I kept watching it. I was afraid somebody else would buy it. So I finally offered them $50, and she said she'd take it. But I said, you got to put a 76 on the wall. She didn't have it. So we've had that a long time. So anyway, I went to the Union Oil Company and said, I want to quit, and I want to take that station in Dorado Hills. And so they said, okay, I think they were happy to get rid of me. I borrowed $4,000 from my mom and dad, and I bought some used equipment, which I still had when I sold the station to Harry 20 years later.
And for those that don't know, Harry, we have a Harry North sighting here in Dorado Hills, a rare event these days. Harry bought the station from Dell. Dell's going to cover that.
Yeah. And so, as time went along, we got all set to start the station, and I had put aside about 6 months of income so that we could be able to make it, you know. And that was hard because I'd never been in business before. I always worked real hard, and I was always a good saver. I could save money. 10% had to go into savings every paycheck, even from a kid. And so it was going to be a new adventure. And I was kind of anxious about it. I'm not a mechanic, so I had to hire one. And I had never pumped gas before other than my own car, so I had to learn that. I even had taught courses for a Union Oil Company on how to do all these things, and I'd never done it. And so it was kind of a new, novel thing. We read a little bit about what was happening in our country in the 60s here. I thought this was interesting. There were some of the newspaper headlines in the 60s now. Remember, this is 64 when I went to open the station. Marilyn Monroe found dead. President JFK assassinated. U.S. troops sends to Vietnam. Daily civil rights marches. Martin Luther King assassinated. Neil Armstrong, first man on the moon. Robert Kennedy assassinated. First successful heart plan. And then there were the Mason family murders. You remember those?
And Manson.
Some of the songs that we were singing there or listening to on the radio I thought were kind of important. I Can't Stop Loving You by Ray Charles. The theme from Summer Place by Percy Bass Orchestra. I still listen to that. I like that. Hey Jude by Beatles. And the Hamster Dance was voted the most hated music of the 60s. Remember that? That was terrible. So that's what was happening when we opened the station in 1964. Remember at that time we had a ball sign, had a big round sign that had a 76 on it, and it rotated, it revolved. And that was a new thing for Union Oil Company. The building itself was new. They had only been doing that for a couple of years. And I had to drive down to Dixon to take a look at one before that. This had a big waiting room and had a nice office area. And all the restrooms, you had to go through the waiting room, which was loaded with vending machines to get to the restrooms. So this was a new concept as far as that went. And so we got it open then on February 4th, 1964, among all the things that were happening then in 1960. And my responsibility, I thought, before I opened the station, I asked the company if I could get some 76 gold credit cards. And so they gave me 50 of them. And they had, since they were stockholders, I think they had $10,000 invested in Dorado Hills, which was a lot of money then. And they gave me credit cards for everybody that lived in Dorado Hills. I had 51 of them. And so I spent a Saturday and I went around and I introduced myself and gave everyone a gold credit card. A gold credit card was really something then because most of the credit cards were only good for 3 months or 6 months. Then they didn't trust you. They had to issue you a new one. But Union Oil gave me one that didn't expire. And a lot of people hadn't seen that before.
Wait, Del, I'm still hung up on the 50.
Pardon?
I'm still hung up on the number 50. So there were only 51
houses.
51 houses.
Okay. That was in Park Village, mostly, a few in Governors. Let's see, over on the other side of Green Valley Road, there were some, out in the rural 5-acre areas, there were some people that lived over there. But it took me 2 Saturdays to get around to introduce myself to all the people that were here.
400 families.
Pardon?
400 families
400 families?
at that time, not just 52.
You were here at that time.
Reported.
Before that. I was really excited about meeting all the people because actually, other than Chuck, most of them were a few years older. I was 34 at the time, and most of them were engineers out at Aerojet, and so they were in their late 40s, maybe 50s. They were older people. At least I thought that's the way it was. So we opened the station, and actually not much happened because there weren't many people around, and so it was a good thing I laid some money aside. And then gradually the people got the idea that we've got to support the service station if it's going to stay here. And some of the things so I had a lot of time in my hands when I was at the station, and I spent a lot of times on the island washing windows, giving them full service. We washed the front and the back window. We checked under the hood. You want the tires checked, we could do that. And I always trained everybody that we always say, thank you for coming in, and just got excited. I spent a lot of time in the islands because I figured that the islands are not Hawaii, but those are where the pumps are. And as a result, I got to know a lot of people that came in the station. We were getting people from the Bay Area. They would come to Sacramento, and then they would see the 76 sign. If you could figure out how to get in, because you had to go past the station, cut across the other lane coming the other way, and find Saratoga Way, and come down, and then finally get back into the station. You almost needed a map just to get into the station from the highway. But some of the things, I had some rather exciting things happen as a result of all these people there. There was one fellow who worked for Dow Chemical that came in a couple times a month. He was about my age, and we liked to talk, and he'd take a break while I filled his car. And one day he said, in know, there's going to be an ethylene glycol shortage. That ethylene glycol is a basic constituent of antifreeze. And this was at the time when cars were having air conditioning, and in order to raise the boiling point, they would put ethylene glycol or antifreeze into the radiators, and this would raise the boiling point. So if you had a car with antifreeze, you had to have antifreeze. And if you had a car with air conditioning, you needed to have antifreeze. And so he said, it's going to be very short, and the price is going to go very high. It was around 75 cents a gallon, I think, at that time. So I called Union Oil Company, and I said, and I used to work in the warehouse, so I knew it very well. How many barrels of antifreeze do you have? And they said, well, we've got 10. I said, what do you want for it? And they said, $1.50 a gallon at that time. And I said, I'll buy the whole thing. I'll pay $1.40 for it. So I had a big truck. We went down and we loaded all the 10 barrels up. Now, a barrel is 55 gallons. It stands, and these were steel barrels. I took it up to our house, up until Airhead Court. We drove around the back, and we had a big patio. It was a used house that we bought. And had a big patio back there, so I put all the barrels there. I never told the fire department, but they weren't inflammable. And so we'd always come up and we had a barrel and we'd pump out the antifreeze and take it to the station. I also sold some of it to other stations. They couldn't get antifreeze, and it was critical at that time. So I kind of kept track of how much extra income I had because of the cheapness of the price I had on the antifreeze, and it added up. And the church we were going to at that time, we're talking about a trip to Israel, London, Israel, Rome, and then to London. We'd be gone over 3 weeks. And I wanted to take our kids. They were in high school at that time. Mickey was just graduating from William Brooks. And the cost was $10,000 for the whole family to go for 3 weeks. And that's what I had my antifreeze savings. And so as a result of this conversation, out on the islands, I was able to earn the money and take my trip. And that was actually the beginning of many, many trips that Lynn and I have taken. But the children also have learned how to travel. The daughter went to Austria as an exchange student. So I think this sparked an interest in seeing the world, and that's what happened. I liked it when the hippies came in. Remember, this is the hippies. They came in with their various colored Volkswagen vans and things. I liked them, I really did.
I bet they like you too, Nick.
They had a freedom about doing things. They weren't all hung up on everything. And I talked to many of them. One time, a fellow came in and he had a tire problem. The tire had separated. You know what that is, Harry. And so I looked at it and I said, well, there's nothing I can do about the tire. You have to throw it away. You need a new tire. And he said, well, I don't know. He said, the only money I have is I can write a check. And I said, where do you live? And he said, San Francisco. And I said, I don't take checks out of Dorado Hills. And he said, well, what am I going to do? And he said, do you know, and I can't remember the fellow's name, but it was a resident of Dorado Hills that I had known for a long time. And he, was I think he was a teacher, a very respected man of the community. And this hippie fellow said, do you know so-and-so? And I said, yes, I do. See, he said, you call him and give him my name, and I'll bet you take the check. So I called him and I gave him a name, and the guy said, take all the checks you can get from that guy. His father's an attorney down in the Bay Area, has all kinds of money. He doesn't approve of his son's lifestyle, but he'll pay anything to keep him out of the house. So he said, if the check isn't any good, I'll pay for the tire. Well, after all, it was $35. hot afternoon and seeing their livestock, I was almost tempted to go on up the hill with them a couple of times, but I never did.
Dale, before you go on, can you talk a little bit about the location of the station and the planning that went involved to get that spot? Because it wasn't, you said you had to drive all around.
Yeah.
So talk about that, please.
Okay. Let's see. Highway 50 was only one lane coming up and another lane coming down. In order to get to the station, you could see the ball, you could see where you wanted to go, but getting there, you had to go up. And at first, there was a little gravel place where you could make a left-hand turn. Actually, it would be illegal nowadays. You could go across the strip in between the two lanes, and you go all the way across, and then you come back down like you're going back to Sacramento. You turn off at Saratoga Way, go down there, and then you turn on Dorado Hills Boulevard, which got you to the station.
Wow.
And so, going out, you had to go back out the same way, and then you get lined up for Sacramento. That was a real detriment because the best traffic we had was out of Lake Tahoe because they could come right down, they could see where they're going, and we were real busy on Sunday afternoons. And then later on, they started working on the freeway as it is now, that part of it. That was quite a change. We got to the point where we're pumping about 500 gallons a day, which wasn't much, Harry. That was hard to make a living then. And so I knew that when the freeway came in, that would change everything because they were cutting off all those stations in Rancho Cordova at that particular time. And so I started hiring extra help and getting them trained and everything. And I bought some new vending machines and was trying to get ready for this. And we were pumping probably around 800 gallons a day in gasoline. And service stations, that wasn't very much, really. And the first day, when they opened up the freeway, we went to 1,500 gallons.
Wow.
And I had planned well for it, but I needed more manpower, and it was really tough. But I liked it because, the money was coming in. I saw money I had never dreamed of as far as income was concerned. Of course, the cost was going up too. The labor costs were going up. After that, most of what you see now came in after I was here.
With Harry?
Yeah, with Harry's part of it. There was a woman who lived out in the Latrobe area over there, and she was probably my age then. And she was a real nice lady, and I always took good care of her car. I always made sure everything was checked and everything. And she came in one day after the freeway was changed and the road went underneath the freeway, and she went in the wrong lane. And I was scared to death, and I ran down there, and I was yelling at her, and she said, rolled down the window, and she said, Del, what's wrong? What's wrong? I said, you're going the wrong way. And she said, oh, don't tell my daughter. How familiar that is nowadays. We're at a point in our house where our kids come and get us now and take us different places. That was hard to get used to at first, but now I like it. But that was some of the things that happened at the station were great. One day, a lady came running into the waiting room and she said, she's going to have a baby. You better come out there. She's going to have a baby on your lot. And I said, she can't do that. That isn't in my contract with Union Oil Company. And so I went out there, and here this woman was behind the wheel in a Volkswagen. And she was so large, it took us several minutes to get her out of the Volkswagen. And she was really in pain. And there was a woman with her, of course. And so we took her inside, and I set her down in the waiting room, and I called the fire department. I said, well, this building right here. here they come down the street, and I explained what was happening. So then they put blankets up over all the walls, all the windows in the room, and they sealed it off so nobody could get in there, so she would have privacy. They put some blankets on the floor, and they examined her, and they determined that she wasn't due right yet. And so, but she can't drive anymore, so they put her in the passenger seat, and she went over, I think she went to Roseville then, the Roseville Hospital where she was headed. I don't know how it happened, but I called the hospital over there and I explained the situation, and the gal gave me her name, and I sent her some flowers. And because we had a contest in the station as to what to name the baby. Somebody wanted Ethel, regular, Royal Triton. And so we had a lot of fun about it. And I didn't ever hear any more about it other than the fact that she was okay and the baby was okay. Then it seemed like months later, one day, a woman walked to my office and she had a little child walking next, just barely a toddler. And she said, "Do you remember me?" And then I knew who it was. And she told me a lot about what had happened prior to that. Her husband was in prison over at Folsom. And she had gotten pregnant before he was sentenced over there. And so she was kind of on her own. Her family was trying to help her. And here was this little child. And so I talked with her, and she said, "You know, the only flowers I've ever received were the ones you sent me." That's got to be.
Yeah, that was pretty nice.
But we have a lot of things happen like that. One morning I just got at the station at 6 o'clock, and a woman who lived right here in Dorado Hills, she called me and she said, "I knew you'd be there." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "What's wrong?" I knew her real well. And she said, "I need to talk to you." I said, "Okay, come on down." And so by the time the help got there, about 7 o'clock, I was busy taking care of things and getting the early people started. So I went and sat down. I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "I've been thinking about committing suicide all night." And she said, "I kept thinking, if I could wait until 6 o'clock, Dale will be at the station, and I could talk to him." And so I spent quite a bit of time that day with her, and she said, "I'm okay now." I trusted her. But what had happened was that her husband had worked at Aerojet for a long time. They had wonderful vacation plans. He bought a motor home and the whole bit. Then he had a heart attack and died just a few weeks after he retired. And she was all alone. She didn't have any family in the area. But, you know, El Dorado Hills was so remote that even prior to that, people would come and live in El Dorado Hills, and the women had trouble because there was no place to shop. There was nothing here, just a few houses, you know, and a few people. A lot of people sold their house and they moved someplace else because of that. I thought it was great, but it's not for everybody. Not for everybody. So things like that were continuing to happen. Oftentimes, people would call me at the house late at night after we closed the station at 10:30 or 12, and they would say, "I have an emergency and I need some cash." And so I would meet them at the station. Now, I would kind of drive around and check and make sure who was there, because going into a dark station at midnight, you don't know who is there. And oftentimes there were the kids involved. They got picked up for drunk driving or whatever, and they needed cash. And I would take their check and give them the cash money. And but I never lost a nickel in doing that. You know, and it wasn't something that happened every day. It happened several times here. But there was one guy that I'll never forget. He wasn't really one of the nicest people that lived in El Dorado Hills. I think if we'd had a committee, he wouldn't have been accepted. But anyway, he didn't come in my station much because he said, "Your price is too high," and it was probably a penny or two more than Sacramento because that's what they charged me for bringing it up here. And he called me about midnight one night, and he said, I have a medical emergency, and I have no gas in my car. I need some gas. Can you help me? I said, sure. So I went down, and I stuck them. You have to open up the station, get the pumps going, get the lights on and everything. And I started putting the gas in, and he said, just put in $2 worth so I can get down when it's cheaper.
I'm sorry about that.
I never forgave you. I was telling this to Lynn the other night, and she said, knowing you, you probably didn't say anything. I said, no, I didn't until he left. When we had the,
Whistling. Did you cover this? Did I miss it?
Pardon?
What about the whistling?
Whistler.
Oh, the Whistler.
Yeah.
Some of that was kind of a nervous habit that I had. As I mentioned before, I was not a mechanic at all, and I had a real reliable. He worked for me for 15, 16 years. He became a good friend, Dorado Hills, and things were happening. Things always go the best the way you know, as you probably could testify. I remember coming in from the islands one time, coming off the islands, and it was a car on a hoist, and it was in the right-hand bay. And when I got in there, had turned, and it was crossways this way, and it was down on the floor, and I never could figure out, I guess the lift lost air, and it came down as it swung around, and it didn't hurt anything. So those are the kind of things that were happening in the bay room periodically. So when you went out on the island to pump gas, you should be friendly and carefree and happy. You know, welcome to Dorado Hills, welcome to the station. And so I would whistle. That was my way of getting rid of all of that stuff that was happening in the, it wasn't like that every day, but almost. And a lot of pressure on getting things done. And so by the time I got out there by able to whistle, then I was more relaxed and do what and then I used to tell them, well, I whistle all the way to the bank, which was in Folsom. You had to go both ways.
Dale, in terms of full service, you said you were a therapist. You said you were a banker. You said, I assume you had a lift, right, in the gas station. Two lifts. So you did mechanical repairs and stuff.
Yeah.
What were some of the other things? Service clubs. What else did you do? It seems like you were pretty busy.
That's exactly right. There wasn't a heck of a lot to do, really, as far as that goes. I worked usually from 6 in the morning till 6 or 7 o'clock at night, 6 days a week. I took Sunday off, usually, unless the Sunday man couldn't work, and then I worked then. Working never bothered me. I had good health, and I liked to work, and I liked what I was doing. I liked to be there and make sure things were going as well as they could. Later on, towards just before I sold the station to Harry, we organized a chamber of commerce in the area. There were just a few of us. At that time, there was the Tom Thumb Market, the golf course, service station. That was about it as far as, I think there was a little place you could buy flowers. I kind of...
The Naked Toadstool Gallery.
Pardon?
The Naked Toadstool Gallery.
Yes, you're right. And so we thought that we needed the Chamber of Commerce in El Dorado Hills. So we formed one, and we got it all incorporated and everything we needed to do. And the first thing we wanted to do was to get El Dorado Hills on the map. Now you could come in the 76 station, and I would be glad to give you a real nice map, which they charge $2.50, $3 for now. But you look down on Highway 50, and where El Dorado Hills was, you would see the word Clarksville. Clarksville had a little cafe which had closed, was open when I opened the station, but it closed in the meantime. There was no commercial value over there at all. Dorado Hills was not on the map, so as the president of the chamber, I wrote to Rand McNally and asked them to put it on the map. The next year, when they put a new map out, there it was. We were on the map. We had a slogan for the new chamber. I don't know if they even use it now, but plant your roots where the oak trees grow.
That's good.
Because you could look up on the ridge up there and you could see the oak trees in the distance up there. We had a lot of social things that we did. We would go down to Folsom to the city hall down there, rent the hall out, and we would have different kinds of dances and things, and we had costume parties and things of that sort. Also, we had some meetings over, you have to help me, what's the name of the restaurant that just burned down in Florence?
Yeah, no,
Sierra Nevada.
Sierra Nevada House. We had several outings over there as far as that goes. The chamber was a lot of fun because there were just a few of us involved, and we had really cooperation as far as the developers were concerned from the chamber. About this time, and I know you had some meetings and some talks about the power lines, but I have a little different twist on it. PG&E was going to put these horrible, monstrous power lines right down to the entrance to Dorado Hills. Now, this was prior to the freeway, and it didn't make sense because one of the things that I really enjoyed about Dorado Hills is they didn't have any poles for electricity or for telephone. In Cameron Park, we have those, and even though they do the best they can, they're still ugly. They're terrible-looking things.
Hey, Del, let's take it aside. So one of the things that Alan Lindsay insisted on is that no TV antennas. So you're supposed to put your antenna inside the garage. I have marketing pictures that show, and underground telephone poles. It's just massive rock ridges, and we're digging trenches for telephone lines. And so everything was down below. It was very, and all with the theory of respecting the natural terrain. Do as little as possible to interrupt the natural terrain. That was the whole big theme. So, back to you.
So then, one day I was in the office, and there was kind of a counter thing that separated the office from the waiting room. And I heard somebody say, "Are you Delton Haven?" And I looked over, and I didn't see anybody. So I thought, well. So then I went back to my work, and then the guy says, "Are you Delton Haven or not?" And so I looked over, and there was a little man who didn't come up with it. I'd never seen him before. And he says, "If you're Delton Haven, I have a subpoena for you." And I thought, what's going on here? If anything to do with the courts or the law or the police, I was always ready to turn myself in and confess everything I went into them. And so I said, okay, and so I took it, and it was PG&E. They were having some kind of a hearing, and they subpoenaed me as president of the Chamber of Commerce. And so I purposely didn't dress up for it. I thought, I'm going to look as humble as I can, so I had my uniform on, and I hadn't put on a clean one that morning, so it had some grease spots and didn't look, but I went into there. And here was this room, there were 4 or 5 lawyers in there with $100 suits, which was, really nice suits on. And I thought, boy, am I out of my place here. And so the big question was, where are you getting all your information that you're giving to the Mountain Democrat and the Sacramento Bee about how terrible it's going to be if you put those power lines across the front of Dorado Hills? And I had nothing to lose, and so I said, I get everything from Maria. And Maria Hicks was her name, and she was a PR person for Dorado Hills. And that's what was the truth. And she would write the stuff all up because the developers certainly didn't want these power lines through there, and they could use the chamber as a mouthpiece. And And so they asked a whole bunch of other questions, a lot of them very personal and everything. And then, I have forgotten the guy's name, but there was another man sitting there, and when I went in there, he said, "Where is your lawyer? Where is your attorney?" I said, "I don't know. Need one." I said, "I haven't done anything." And I was in there for about an hour. They kept asking me all these questions about this information that I was giving out. I was careful. I read it, and I couldn't see anything that was wrong. It was very prejudiced, but that was our cause. And so, anyway, that kind of went along. And then later on, my little fella brought me another subpoena, and they were having a court hearing up in Placerville. And Mary Hughes was the presiding judge. And so they called me as a witness. El Dorado Hills people called me as a witness. And they asked me about it. And I said, "Let me tell you a story." See, even then I was telling stories. I said, "Let me tell you a story." I said, "A couple Sundays ago, we were at my brother's house in South Sacramento. And the kids were small, and they said, 'Daddy, what are those things up in the air?' And I said, 'Well, those are towers to carry the electricity around.' And Kurt, the oldest and the wisest, he said, 'They're ugly, Dad, they're ugly.' So I told that story in the courtroom, and I said, if my oldest child thinks these towers are ugly, they must be ugly, because he didn't know what they were. We live in El Dorado Hills where we don't have telephone poles and power poles, and we certainly don't want them coming across. And I think that's why the judge ruled that they had to move it out. But you know, a couple of weeks ago or so, I was thinking about this, and I was over in the commercial area, and you can see those towers over there. I'm sorry that they're there for those people, but I'm glad they weren't right in the very front part. They would have come right over the silver station at that time.
Wow.
So the chamber...
They probably would have had to be moved by the time all the interchange work happened. I mean, they would have been in the way, I'm sure.
Exactly.
You saved them money.
Yeah, it was Kurt's remark.
Kurt's giving you credit for that.
Kurt's a hero. At this time, let me, I don't know how long we've been going here. I get carried away. Any questions that you have that I could talk about the first 20 years? Okay, young lady?
In the early 70s, I think it was, when there was a scarcity of gas at my local gas station in Connecticut. Did that take place out here too?
Yeah, that's a good story. Gas shortage. We only had so much gas. The way I worked it was I would go down to the station before 6 o'clock in the morning. I would stick the tank, and I would read the meters. I knew exactly how much gas I had in storage. And I would figure out, I knew when the next load would come in. And I would have about 4 or 5 hours worth of pumping. And so I would open at 6, and when I would read the meters occasionally, and I knew exactly where I was, and minutes. When we pumped as many gallons, sometimes we'd only have 500 or 600 gallons that we could pump, and cars were lined up everywhere. And I would close the pumps all up because I wanted to keep it there for El Dorado Hills people that were working. They could come in at 6 or so, wait a while, and get gasoline. It was a very tense time because people would call me, "I'm out of gas," and I'm sorry. I said, "I put certain policies down and I'm staying with it. I can't help you." And one customer came in and he said, "I didn't think I'd ever see you treat your wife that way." I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Your wife is out there and she's in line." And I said, "She knows that she comes out at 6 and I'll give her personal service." But you know, what happened was I made a lot of money during that period of time because I could let the help go at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and we could spend a lot of time working in the shop. And as a result of that, I put a lot of that money away, and we took a trip. Len and I went to England, Scotland, and Ireland for 30 days. So you see, things that happen have good things that happen down the way too. Sir, you had a question?
How much was a gallon of gas in 1964?
How much? When I started, it was around 30 cents a gallon. Remember, there was no sales tax at that time on gasoline. Probably a year or two later, I went home one day and I told Lynn, I said, I just raised the price of gasoline to 50 cents. I said, I think we better start thinking about another business. Nobody's going to pay 50 cents for gasoline. And it's heading back down there, isn't it? Kurt?
Tell them about when Aerojet laid all the people off.
Oh, yeah. Aerojet, practically almost everybody, either directly or indirectly, had ties with roots with Aerojet. And when they started laying people off, many of the people that were here, what was surprising though was how resilient the people that got laid off were. They went into different kinds of businesses. Here we were going to have a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house. We had never had any of that before. And the closet in the master bedroom, you could walk into it. My dad thought that was the strangest thing. He said, you ought to rent that out. And we had a room downstairs. One of the boys slept there. And then Kurt had a room up on the top floor. And our daughter Mickey had a room. 2 baths. And the antenna was in the garage up underneath the lab. And we got channel 3 and 10, and that was about it. And the nice thing about it is in the back there was a big slab where I later on put the antifreeze and everything. But the yard was not in the back, and it wasn't in for a long time. I didn't have the money, and I also didn't have the time. But you could, one time we took off from Sacramento, and we went to Washington, and as we flew over, we could see El Dorado Hills down below, and we could see our house because of that slab in the back. And the kids thought that was pretty important.
Del, so who did you buy your house from?
From El Dorado Hills.
El Dorado Hills West, which was Lindsay Inc.
Exactly.
Got it.
But the word got around in the village that we had bought a house there. I think maybe we had passed some kind of a test that they had, but anyway, they were going to let us buy a house there. And I forgot who it was, one of them came up and he said, I need to talk to you. And I said, okay. So I thought, well, they're not going to let us live here, you know. And he said, are you aware that the bathroom upstairs collapsed and fell to the bottom story of the people who bought the house brand new? And I said, no one told me about that. Seemed like everybody in El Dorado Hills knew except me, the guy who was buying the house. Just a second, please. Oh, yeah, this is soft. And after when I retired from the station, I became a broker, got my real estate license, and knowing all the things you have to disclose, I realized how serious that was. So I went to El Dorado Hills people, and I said, is it true that the bathroom fell down? They said, yes, it is. But we can assure you that it's all been repaired and everything's fine. And we were already into the deal. We were getting ready to transfer the kids to school. I said, okay. And it never did fall down. I never heard that it ever did after we sold it either. But I paid $22,500 for it. We paid $22,500. 20 years later, I sold it for $120,000. And I replaced the $1,400 in my retirement fund with $100,000. Let me tell you one more story about the station I think is really significant. I had a young fellow by the name of Eddie who worked for me. Eddie worked for me for a long time. He was a night man. And he was the nicest kid. You would like to adopt him and take him home with you. But he was very nonchalant about things. He never got excited about anything. But he was very, very dependable. And I would walk out of the station. I knew that Eddie would take good care of it until I got back down the next morning. And the phone rang one night about midnight. And I said, hello. And he said, Del, this is Eddie. I said, Eddie, what are you doing calling me at this hour? You should have gone home at 10:30. And he said, we got robbed, Del. And I said, you got robbed? When did you get robbed? And he said, at 10:30. And I said, Eddie, how many times have I told you, when something happens, call me right away. You know, don't dilly-dally around like you usually do. And I really tuned him out. And finally he said, Del, he said, I couldn't call you. I was tied up in the waiting room. I felt really bad. So I came down. Eddie was fine. The safe it was in the floor safe, had an upper section, which I kept for operation money. The bottom parts where I kept the serious money that would be deposited the next day in the bank in Folsom. We didn't have one in Dorado Hills. Had to drive every day to Folsom. And so they just got the money at the top. He was putting the money in the safe when the guy came in and put the gun on him and took it. And then he tied him up in the waiting room. And they took his car. And so I called the Highway Patrol at that particular time. And then by morning, they told me that they had found the people, had arrested them, had recovered our cash, and had recovered Eddie's car. So I didn't even have to put an insurance claim in. But I'll never forget, though, and I really felt badly about chewing Eddie out for not calling me right away. He was tied up.
I need to back up, and I need to say, when Dale was sharing about when he first discovered the site of the station and got interested in moving up here, he was starting to talk to me about it. He said, wouldn't that be nice to live in Dorado Hills? And of course I thought, well, it's forever up the road. But he said, Ann, I could come home for lunch. Never happened. 20 years, never came home for lunch. Thought I would just add that. So I'll give you a little
I was busy.
thoughts about the children, how we handle that in today's is so different than then. Because our children, we had 3, would take off in the morning and take off and find their buddies, find the Brittles and some of the others and hang out and be gone 3 or 4 hours in the day. Then they come home and they've got several with them because everyone's come for lunch. So the gang is there, and pretty much that's how we lived with our children, giving them much trust. Then later on in the afternoon, they'd hop on their mini bikes and blaze their own trails up the hills. And of course, once in a while, the bike would break down on their journey and they'd have to push it all the way home. And then there were a lot of rattlesnakes around during that time. And one particular day, they brought me in a box with the head cut off, a rattlesnake at my front door. And of course, they rang the doorbell and ran. They thought that was so funny. I looked and I screamed, and of course that wasn't too funny. It looked so alive, but it was not. It was dead. So these little things is what they planned for us as parents. Well, our school was called Park Village. Our 3 children went to Park Village. Recently, they celebrated their 50th anniversary, maybe 2 years ago. And Dell and I went down there and to look at them to see how things had changed. We hardly recognized it. Just the road going to the school, they had all these big houses on the sides. Well, when we would go down there, nothing but weeds and empty lots. And one building would be the school. Now there's several buildings. And we were recognized as perhaps pioneers in the community, and so we were kind of escorted around in the tour. And at one point they had some scrapbooks, and so I started looking in these scrapbooks. And I found pictures of our children, particularly involved in a frog jumping contest. That was a big thing, the frog jumping contest. And then looking further, I saw some pictures of previous PTA presidents, of which I was one. And we were planting trees and putting the plaque, the name of the president, at the bottom of the tree. So somewhere down there, I've got a tree. So if you ever find it, let me know. Well, much time was spent taking the children to many activities. Boy Scouts, swimming. Our kids were very involved in swimming. Many swim meets. We had much going on ballet. Our daughter liked ballet. She had ballet lessons.
Where did you get ballet lessons?
Out of Placerville, there was a ballet company there. And of course, she would be really excited and try to tell Dell about what she was learning. So he decided, I'm going to go to their performance. And he had to make arrangements so he could get out of the station. And he came, and wouldn't you know, he was expecting this cute little girl in pink little tutu, just performing this beautiful dance. And what do you think? She was a tree. She stood like this. And
All that money I spent.
Del saw where all his lessons had gone to. Of much interest, like I said, all three of our children went to Park Village and graduated, and also went on then to Buckeye and then to Ponderosa. But one of our children, Mickey, had opportunities in education and became a teacher and then became an educator. And when you know, she was vice principal at Park Village, which is then called Brooks, at one time. And I think it was kind of hard for some of the teachers to take, because all of us, this little girl who was their student, now came and she is their boss. And I think Barbara Criddle had a few thoughts about that. Where did this little punk come from? Of course, you were part of making her your deposit in her life. Mickey and I would go and do much what they call chase parks. Cars would break down on the freeway, and of course the station couldn't stock all the parts that they needed. So we would go to Folsom and Rancho Cordova many times, several times a day sometimes, to find these certain parts that they needed. So that was quite an activity that we had.
Was Del ever sick?
Dale was never sick. He didn't dare get sick. Had too much going on in his life. And I couldn't get sick because Dale has often said that he provided for the family and I raised them. And you know, it's kind of true. I never thought of it that way. But we had a balance. Maybe it was off sometimes, but we did what we had to do at the time. We lived close to Berthelsen Park, and of course they have a pool there. And it would have been ridiculous for us to have had a swimming pool at our house, because that pool was so close. And our children just really used it, almost lived there. In fact, when it was dinner time, I'd call down and say, will you tell Kurt and Brad and Mickey to come home now? Sure. And he'd call them out of the pool, you know, time to go home. So that was a very unique relationship there. Today it wouldn't even exist. Well, all this really seems more like another life of what I'm telling you about, or telling you about someone else's life, because it's so intense in its meaning and in its affecting many people, including those that were around us. Then the selling of the station and just big events in our life. And the kids grew up. We had an empty nest, so I found a lot of time on my hands. So I started getting involved in our church Bible school that we were attending at the time. And I was there at the right time to be trained, even myself, to be a teacher and to be a counselor. So that gave me a very fulfilling thing to do after it seemed like the kids were gone. Though they would come back. We had one rule. You can come back once, but you can't bring a wife and children. And then within the last 10 years, Dale and I have had opportunity to go on short-term missions. And so we've been blessed to serve on a team in Russia and 3 times to Kenya and Africa. Those are added blessings in our life that we couldn't do otherwise.
No, I'm sorry. You're not embellishing this nearly enough. So when AIDS first breaks out and everybody's afraid of it and doesn't know about it, and you think you can get it from shaking hands and stuff, where do you go and what do you do?
Well, we went to Kenya, and we taught in the churches, and each one of the churches would have an AIDS, HIV women's group. And it was also one of the trips we took was right after the government uprisal, and houses were burned, and people saw their children killed and their daughters raped. And we came about 2 months later, and it was perfect timing because they needed a hug. Yeah.
Other people might see
They
a little bit
They needed a hug, and we hugged them. And later on, they told one of the other people, you know, those women, they weren't afraid to touch us, and so many people are afraid to even touch us. But we loved them, and we loved them with the love of the Lord, and many of them were encouraged because of that. So that was an exciting time of my life.
How long did it take Dale to build that service station there?
No, he was kept busy, believe it or not, teaching some of those women. So really, it was a great time, and it all began in Dorado Hills. It was a beautiful time of service in that era in my life, and then in this era. Trying to put them together and fitting them in there is kind of a puzzle. But it's a life of fulfillment, and I'm thankful that it began here and perhaps will even end here in our relationship, yet continuing in Dorado Hills.